for the longest time, driving to work every day, and I would see airplanes in the sky, I would just want to reach up and take that plane out of the sky because I didn't want it to hurt anybody. And and that lasted a long time with me, but that was my humanity coming back to me.
Hi everyone, Chris J here from Blue Coat Foundation. This past September 11th, we hosted our third annual honor workout, the DOM, in conjunction with our third Project Endure. Officer Joe Cirrito completed a 24-hour workout in honor of his friend, Dominic Pezullo, who died in the line of duty when the Twin Towers fell on 9/11. Also on 9/11, I had the honor to talk with a 27-year retired police officer from the same police department Officer Pezullo was from, the Port Authority Police Department. Robert Bobby Egbert was there on 9/11. We talk about his experience that day and how it has affected his life. I want to thank Bobby for being so open and honest with such a sensitive topic. Bobby dedicates this podcast to the 65 Port Authority police officers who have died in the line of duty, especially the 37 who perished on 9/11. So Joe's out there running 24 hours for his friend Dominic Pezullo right outside the door, and he's doing just this continuous circuit. Coming from an officer who was there on 9/11 and seeing him out there sweating, what are your what feelings are conjured up?
Well, it's I can be, say the cliches. It's the thin blue line and that, but I got to know Joe over the last 10 years. Recently, I was with him at the one of our commands that Dominic Pezullo, the person who
He's running for, right?
running
The
for
Dom. Yeah.
the Dom, uh, he addressed his roll call at that command, and it was very emotional.
Right.
Actually, one of our chiefs came to that roll call. He was a graduate of Lehman High School, and that's where Joe Cirrito and Dominic Pezullo met each other as teachers. So, I understand with Dominic and I I'm sorry, Joe and I are on sort of the same page. We 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 work toward never letting the fallen be forgotten. I'm big on instilling lineage uh, in the officers, especially the new officers. Um, on my police department, their majority of the officers weren't even around on September 11th. Some of them weren't born yet. A lot of them were babies. Uh, they don't have the same understanding, the same emotions, the same feelings that I and others have uh, who went through that, and and the memories of those that we lost. So it's important to keep that lineage up. They're working in the shadows of incredible heroes. I want them to always remember that. Joe is great at that. What he does, um, some of the runs he does. I remember I wrote a story about Joe about his run to Sacramento. I believe that was a 420-mile run. And in that story, from interviewing Joe, Dominic Pezullo played a big part. Of course, Joe swears that Dominic appeared to him and helped him to continue to finish that run. So Dominic has a real inner desire to continually honor the fallen of our profession.
Yeah, he's very passionate. He'll call me randomly, and if he calls me, I'm like, okay, he has something to say, and he's breathing hard. Like, what are you doing, Joe? Oh, I'm on a 20-mile run. I just wanted to run something by you, and he just goes off on this inspirational rant. Rant is probably a negative word, but he does that, and I'm just like doing my thing, and I'm just listening. He has that in him. It's good.
Well, he gets very emotional too.
Yeah.
I remember I flew out to L.A. to interview him. I found out about Joe. This is interesting. I'm retired now. I still work for my union, the Port Authority PBA. I'm the public information officer. So I get all these news feeds as part of my job. And I remember I saw an article about this LA officer who runs. And I was always a runner and everything, so it was of interest to me. And then I saw the name Dominic Pezullo in it. And it hit me like, what? And so I continued reading. I immediately got on the phone and called the LAPD, what do you call it? The protective, police protection, police.
Did you call our league or did you call
No,
like media relations?
no, I called your union.
Okay, yeah, protective league.
Yeah, the protective league. I explained who I am, the PIO for another law enforcement union. And they got me in touch with Joe almost immediately.
Yeah.
They reached out, they tracked him down where he worked. And we've been, friends ever since. So
Yeah.
I flew out. I asked him if I can write a story about what he does. And so I was out in LA and I did basically a ride along with him one day, and right here in the Olympic division. And at one point, yeah, he was talking about Dominic and his close ties with Dominic and how Dominic's death led him to finally take the step to try to become a police officer. And he started crying.
That's Joe.
And but that's it, yeah. And I remember writing that he's not ashamed when his tears fall when he talks about Dominic. When he was addressing Dominic's command's roll call, he got very emotional, and he started again. He had to take minutes to compose himself. And I remember him standing there going, that long pause of silence. And I always said, let's start, I wanted to start clapping, but then he came out of it. But yeah, that's Joe. He's just so passionate and emotional about the work he does and those who he works with.
Right.
It's I always say, you can't understand what being a police officer is unless you're a police officer.
Right.
Our jobs are not what they portray on TV, what you read about in books.
Right.
It's real what we deal with.
Yeah, I think in our profession, it's not, statistically speaking, the most dangerous job out there or profession. It's not even the highest stress, but there is a layer of stress that's evil in nature where another human is trying to hurt you that no other profession has. And I think that is really the layer that makes it that's the stress that that differentiates us, right, from other people and catches up to us later in life and gives us this bad filter towards humans in general, that needs to be worked on.
Well, I think, and I understand what you're saying. It's a lot of it has to do with, first of all, you have to accept what you do.
Right.
All right, you have to understand what the job is. I've always said, you can graduate the police academy, but don't think you're a cop. It's going to take at least 5 years to be a cop, where you can really call yourself a cop. And and the stress that everybody talks about being a police officer isn't really what happens on the streets. That's why you became a cop. All right. Uh, it's a lot of the stress has to do with what goes on in the station house, the administration, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You can never be right. All right. But you're the one that has to make the decisions on the spot. See, when you're out on patrol, you're the boss until another boss comes along.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But you're the boss. You have to make that decision. And you can't leave until there's a resolution to that decision. many of the decisions you make, um, particularly to arrest somebody, uh, you're taking that person's freedom away. All right, and the public doesn't understand that, but this is important. And then when you just spoke about them trying to hurt you and this and that, we've all been there, we've all done it. Um, the difficult thing is, yes, I understand, and every cop understands the force continuum, and you always go a level of force higher than what's being used against you. That's a little bit different today because if somebody is being violent with you, certainly you have to defend yourself. Number one. Number two, you have another job. You got to take that person into custody. And he doesn't want to become. He doesn't want to go into custody. Um, and you have to be careful about how you do that now, because there's cell phone cameras. Everybody's taking pictures of you, but nobody understands what you're doing. I always say, uh, it always when people see a scene where police are piling up on a guy, all right, and a lot of people say, well, why couldn't they just handcuff him? My response is, have you ever tried to handcuff somebody who doesn't want to be handcuffed? Try it someday.
Sometimes the smaller and skinnier they are, the harder it is.
Yes, yes,
I mean, not
yes.
sometimes. I think always.
I always. I found that out early in my career, especially with females.
Yeah.
Uh, they can destroy you.
Yeah. Tell me about. You speak about the choices we make. Tell me about some of the choices, maybe not directly, but how your choices on or collectively on 9/11 affected you since then. Maybe there are some regrets, maybe there are things you wish you would have done better, maybe some decisions that you should have done. Is there anything there, and how, if so, how did how have you gotten through some of those? And I ask this because doing these podcasts, this survivor's guilt is real, and people live with it for a long time, right? And what's it been? 23 years since then.
23
23
years.
years. So I don't know what you know level of evolution you are in the sense of those things, but anything you could share with that when it comes to choices, how important it is, um, from what you've learned from your experience in 9/11, being there, to where you are now, that could help other coppers.
Well, let me just go back to that day. I was working bicycle patrol that day. Um, actually, had a car stop, and yes, bicycle cops do stop cars. All
Right.
right. Um, and all of a sudden, I started hearing, and it was early in the morning, and as everybody's always said, it was just a gorgeous September morning. Not a cloud in the sky, and started hearing some radio traffic that wasn't normal. And then I heard a lieutenant get on uh, using a code uh, that indicated an explosion at the World Trade Center. So I went right back to the station house, uh, and we deployed down to the World Trade Center. One of the things that stays in my mind, we took a bus from our academy, uh, had a section at that command for different types of training, and so we grabbed one of their. Uh, they had these small buses, like the small school bus, but all done in police, stuff and all that.
Right.
And a bunch of us jumped on that. We threw a bunch of equipment on it, and maybe there was 9 of us on that bus or so. Uh, at that point, I had 16 years on the job. Everybody in that bus, except one, had 16 or more years on the job. Um, the person sitting right in front of me was a young officer, a young female officer. I noticed right away her equipment looked brand new, uniform looked brand new, and So I said to her, I said, listen, we all were through 90, we're in the 93 bombing. Just stay with us. Everything will be okay. Yes, I regret that because nothing was okay. And when we got on scene, uh, well, actually, we came in from the Brooklyn side, and we had before we entered the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, which leads you right to the World Trade Center from Brooklyn. First tower came down, so we got stuck in the tunnel because all that debris that you saw, the clouds and this, filled the tunnel.
Did you know what was happening as you were in the tunnel? Did you
Well, we
realize?
saw the tower when you entered the tunnel from the Brooklyn side. The prominent figures you saw looming over the tunnel were the two towers.
Got it.
They were on the Manhattan side, but they were so huge. They just stood out. And so we saw the one tower start cascading down. And I remember a sergeant on that bus said, "Oh my God, we just lost a lot of people," and that didn't hit me. I remember looking to my left, saw the Statue of Liberty there. And I said, "Oh my God, they're going to attack the Statue of Liberty." I mean, you think of crazy things when you're going through these events.
Huh.
And we got the tunnel was closed, obviously, except for emergencies. But so we got in the tunnel and we couldn't see. We got halfway through and we couldn't see anymore. All right, and then all of a sudden, all these people were walking out of the smoke. I said, "What the hell was that?" I thought maybe they were getting that, abandoning their cars, but no, there were people escaping Lower Manhattan. That was their only route out.
Wow.
So then we had to get all those people out. We only had one person die out of that group, and uh, after we got them secured, and firefighters were coming through the tunnel on foot, so they hopped on our vehicle and uh, we all went out together. We left one officer behind um, to stay with the person who eventually died, and that officer was an RN also, registered nurse. So and we continued, and we got up on West Street, and then the second tower came down, and um, the first thing central that I noticed was total lack of color. Everything was gray, and you couldn't see anything. And uh, when we came out of the tunnel and up to West Street, um, there was a New York City cop. I don't know if it was a New York City cop or a New York City traffic agent or whatever, still standing his post trying to direct traffic. Well, there wasn't any traffic, but he was still just there doing it. And it was just a bizarre juxtaposition.
Hmm.
Um, so getting back to what I was talking about, we got up on West Street. We couldn't go any further because the pile, so we were right there. And 9 months later, I during that period, I hadn't seen that young officer for that entire period. And I always regretted that I told her everything would be okay, because nothing was okay.
The female officer.
Yeah, the female officer that sat in front of me on the
Yeah.
bus, and I always wondered because we all got separated down there, and I always wondered, what happened to her, what her on the 9 months later in May, the closing ceremony of the rescue and recovery site. At the ceremony there, she was the first cop I ran into. She was working in a job-wide command,
Just got goosebumps.
and yeah, and I saw her. Her name is Janice. I hugged her. I said, "Janice, I just, like, wow, I said, I said, Janice, how long were you on the job that day?" She said, "I was out of the academy 3 months."
Wow.
I said, "You talk about baptism by fire." And and then I said, "I'm so happy to see you, and we've been friends ever
So you
since.
didn't know if she made it or not.
No, well, I know she wasn't. We were all listed as missing
Got it.
because we had no communications. Everything wrote down where we were. We were uh, at the what I call the South Bridge. There were two bridges that went over West Street from the World Trade Center to the Financial Center, and we were at that southern bridge, and it was surreal. There was no color.
Hmm.
It was hard to see. It was you were up to your shins in just powder on the ground like a blizzard, but it was the remains of the building, the incinerated remains of the building.
Wow.
Um, so we just set up as we were, what we were taught to do is just set up a command post right there. We had no communications, everything was down. Uh, Cell phones weren't working, no radio communications. So we just set up that post and then started working with firefighters and trying to uncover people uh, and things like that. I don't have a lot of recollection of that day. I started, and I spoke to other guys too who parts of it are missing, and because your brain doesn't allow it. And so I started putting a timeline together some months later about when the towers came down, the timeline. Um, when Tower 7 came down much later in the day, in the evening, actually. Now, we were on site from when the first tower came down. Uh, we were cut off from anything north of us, no radio communications, and we just worked at that site, just trying to do whatever we could do. Um, it wasn't until much later in the day, about maybe 5 p.m. or so, we made it to our command center, the department's command center, which was set up north of the Trade Center in Manhattan Community College. And I remember walking in there. Yeah, I remember we were covered with debris. We spent the previous 8 to 10 hours just working at the site, trying to rescue, not really rescue people, uncover people. Um, and so we walked in there. People looked at us like we were ghosts, and we were all covered with all the gray, powder and debris and everything. And that's when we learned we were on the list of the missing.
Hmm.
And I said, "Oh my God!" It was then that I learned about how the officers we lost, and that hit me hard. Um, I found that to be unbelievable. For some reason, I always thought we were invincible, and though we didn't have the final numbers yet, um, we knew considerable amount of our officers were killed. And I had 16 years on the job then. I always considered it those 16 years. Uh, I was fortunate. During those 16 years, we didn't suffer one single line of duty death. We had obviously officers shot. I had two classmates of mine shot. Um, you know, an incredible amount of injuries, which is normal. Some very serious, obviously, but no line of duty deaths. And I said, "Wow, I'm going to get through this without that," you know. And then, in a matter of seconds, 37 of my brothers and sister were dead. It's hard to imagine that, because you you're going through a period where your whole career you haven't experienced that. I've been to obviously many police funerals in other departments, and but my department we didn't have any in that 16-year period. I had many before that, but not in my 16 years. And that was a big gut punch, you know. And I remember we were exhausted. exhausted. And our command post at the college was in their gymnasium, and it was a frenetic place. They had triage centers set up. They had this. They had that. A bunch of supplies coming in. Exhausted, and I remember me and another cop I was with. We just went over to the bleachers because of the gymnasium, laid down. Then all of a sudden, everybody started running out. So what the hell's going on? Somebody said Tower Seven's coming down, and I just said, well, I don't want to see another building collapse. So I just stayed there,
Hmm.
And
Wow.
in the period in between, I don't have a lot of recollection, and I've been able to piece it together from what people have told me I did. And to give you an example, I remember uh, at our station house sometime later talking about with guys about the events of the day, and I mentioned something about there were landing gear on like West Street, from the planes, and one detective sergeant said to me, he goes, "Yeah, remember all the body parts?" I said, "No." He said, "Bobby, you couldn't get anywhere near the body parts unless you near I'm sorry, the landing gear, unless you went through, a sea of body parts." And I thought that's strange. I said, "But no, there were two airplanes. There was more than one landing gear, so maybe we're talking about different locations." Sometime after that, I was talking with another friend of mine who was with me that day, and I mentioned that to him. Just I was still bothered me.
Right.
And I said to him, I relayed that conversation to him. He goes, "Bobby, don't you remember the arm sticking out of the fence? On West Street where we were, there was a construction fence in the middle. I don't know what they were doing. But he goes, "Bobby, you were up and down that fence for hours." He goes, "The whole thing was body parts." I don't recall that at all. Not, he says, none. Uh, a psychologist told me that the it might come back to you sometime. You don't know. Or it may, but that's your mind. Your mind is blocking out certain things because you had a job to do. And so you probably just ignored that stuff. Um, and there's a lot of stuff that, you know, I just don't recall. I don't recall. I remember certain things,
Right.
but the things that were bad, I guess I can say, I don't recall. I don't recall.
Yeah, there's something to say about trauma that we go through. Uh, I was involved in a critical incident 2.5 years ago, and I, I remember myself being separated from where it happened, and it felt like I would just blink, and I was back at back where it happened. It was only maybe 25 feet away, but I don't remember closing that distance. But I kept going back to see what was happening there. They're performing, trying to save the guy's life, and I think about 3 times, like coppers find, hey, I told you come over here. Are you all right? And I just remember, like, I don't even remember walking over there. And why is my brain making me walk over there? You're just on this autopilot. So, and there's a lot of pieces to that are just kind of I remembered later, right? It's more that it pieced together with time. It's funny how trauma works. I feel like during my incident, it happened when I had 18 years on, and all the preparation I did to be able to act appropriately at that one moment caused stress in my life. However, if I didn't prepare in such a way, I probably would not have reacted the same way, and I would not have gone into this automatic mode like a straight drone, like a machine, and just get things done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
So and that that follows us our whole life as far as stress. Now, where's the balance for a younger cop now, right? Because we can't go to a graphic scene and get emotional. It's almost a safety mechanism that we are like robots and we just handle business like because we're supposed to protect people. But if we, I don't know, I don't know what the balance is. I've been trying to write about this and talk to people about it. Where is the balance? When do you allow yourself to be a human, right? Because we're supposed to go home and talk to our spouses about it, but you're not going to do that. Guess what? What happened today, honey? Oh, I don't want to say graphic things here. We don't need to. We already know, but you you just don't talk about it, and it stays with you, and that's how the officer in the trenches is able to protect. But there's that wave keeps growing over time. What would you say to, from your experience and what you went through, would be a good counterbalance to that for young coppers out there?
What I learned through my own experience is talk. Don't keep it in. Um, there was a period of time. I remember one incident when after 9/11, and my job was on almost 2 years. We were on everybody on 12-hour tours, no days off. We called it. Some refer to it as the Baton Death March, and one of the greatest things I've heard, I guess, one officer said, "They all died and went to heaven. We lived and went straight to hell." Yeah, so that sort of says what we went through for that period of time. But talking about it is so important, and I learned that through my career. And unfortunately, you learn that later in your career. I remember this young officer pulled his radio car next to mine, and I was always a union rep, and I always had to uh, keep that that valiant face up, to everything's okay. And he pulled up next to me and he goes, "Bobby, is it okay to be scared?" And I just looked at him. I said, "Scared?" I said, I was scared to shit. I was so petrified that day. I thought I was going to have trouble controlling my bowels. I said,
Right.
"Yeah, it's good to be scared. That shows you're human." All right. Um, but what you just described before, the robotics, being a robot, uh, we're trained in such a way that we know what we have to do. Many of the things we do, and not even talking about your critical incident, my critical incident, just the normal things we do. We know what we have to do.
Yeah.
There's a pattern we have to follow.
Yeah.
Okay, and that takes over, and it doesn't, and everything else gets blocked out. It's basically that tunnel visions stuff that they talk about, but it's a little bit different than it. But um, so everything else gets blocked out. But when you said before, when do I become a human again? And that happens, I guess, afterwards. And I'll give you an example. I told you we were stuck in that tunnel. For the longest time, I had difficulty driving through tunnels.
Oh yeah.
Uh, this incident, they hijacked aircraft. For the longest time, driving to work every day, and I would see airplanes in the sky, I would just want to reach up and take that plane out of the sky because I didn't want it to hurt anybody. And that lasted a long time with me, but that was my humanity coming back to me. That was uh, me starting to realize the trauma I had been through, that my brothers and sisters had been through, the incredible loss of humanity that day. Um, couldn't comprehend it at the time. If we did, we couldn't do our jobs. It would be impossible to do what we did that day. Um, so it you just deal with it later. I had a psychologist tell me. I was talking with her, and I said, I don't understand these people who want to take ownership of the whole 9/11 thing.
What do you
And
mean, take ownership?
they, they're out there promoting their their views, their nonprofits, this or that, and all that. And some of it very good work, some of it questionable work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Whenever anybody asks me when they find out I was involved in 9/11, how was it? My response has always been, it was a difficult day. And
Yeah.
that's it. I didn't want it to go any further with it.
Right.
I don't want to, you know, but there are those that were out there that they celebrate that they were involved, or they
Mm-hmm.
want to become celebrities, and there were those that weren't even there that do that. So
Well,
that's always bothered me, and I said, I, these people want to be close to it. I want to get as far away from it as I can. And she said to me, she says, well, unfortunately, it happened to you. It's a part of you. It's never ever going to leave you, and you have to accept it. And if there's anything that came out of 9/11 for me, was understanding the gift of acceptance, and probably the best gift you can give yourself. I've accepted that this happened. I don't like that it happened. I pray that it never ever happens again. Um, you know, we lost 37 cops that day in my department. New York City lost 23. The fire department, that what I call an unimaginable number, 343. And there were a number of federal officers, a number of New York State court officers that died. Um, it the 37 for my department was the largest single loss of police officers any department's ever suffered in one incident in the history of American law enforcement. Certainly an unwanted distinction, but we've learned to embrace that distinction, and we pray it never befalls another department. Um, and we have to keep that alive within our department. Um, I never understood. I remember once someone they were visiting the station house where I worked at that time, and they said, "How do you guys work here? You're surrounded by death all the time." And I didn't never thought of that. And I go, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Every wall's pictures of dead cops." I never thought of it that way. Surrounded by death, because it can never leave us. It can never. And what do police departments do? I used to tell the cops, God forbid if you buy it on your post today, yeah, they're going to give you a nice funeral and all that, but what's going to be on that post tomorrow? Another blue suit. The parts are interchangeable, so you have to keep that in your mind. Like we can't forget those who have fallen, and I never thought of it about as being surrounded by death. But when this person said that, it sort of made sense to me. Everywhere we go, every wall in the station there's pictures of dead cops, and certainly in our long history, certainly 9/11, and since then, and now we have all those that are dying from 9/11 illnesses,
right.
and it's sad. It's I my older brother died of Agent Orange exposure from his time in Vietnam, and he died 25 years after the war. And I remember saying to myself, that damn war is still killing our guys. I'm reliving that now
Hmm.
with with the officers I've worked with. It's basically the same thing.
Yeah,
It's
I think we've come a long way with helping officers from like the 80s and 90s. There's a lot of resources, but I do notice that the culture is still very strong because of what we have to do. The younger cops, they have a Superman complex, and probably I did, right? Probably you did, and to think about, I don't think I think we practice tactics really well, but I don't think anybody as a young cop thinks, "Oh, this could happen to me." I don't think anybody closes their eyes and pictures their face on a social media post, on a T-shirt, on a challenge coin.
Well, think about it this way. From the moment you're born, you're dying.
Yeah.
We all know we're going to die. Life is not infinity.
Right.
Uh, that's a burden that every human lives with, but they don't think about it. We all know we're going to die. Uh, if police officers, any law enforcement officer, firefighter, whatever, first responder, thought about that thought, they couldn't do their job.
At every radio call, right?
Right.
There's no way.
It would stop. It would stop. It would. I have never responded to a job where I thought, okay, this is it. This is it. Some very serious jobs. Afterwards, I said, holy, I could have got killed doing that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you were speaking earlier. I have never, ever, 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 and this is not this is not a statement of confidence. I have never been scared while handling a radio call.
Right.
But many times I was scared after.
Yes.
The holy shit factor. Like that was not good.
Yes.
Right? It's interesting.
Yes. You sit in your car and I don't know if you've ever experienced it. All of a sudden you get the shakes, like what you just went through. And it just sometimes used to happen to me sometimes, like, oh my God.
Oh yeah. No, it happened to me. One that stands out because again, the whole not clash, but the differences in generations, right? It was at the Beverly Center. This kid had a gun underneath his between his body and his arm. He was just clutching it. Jumped out, yelling at him, drop the gun, drop the gun. I was actually telling him, don't get the gun, release it, let it fall. He looked at his gun, he looked at me, and he smiled. So he eventually kind of chicken winged, his arms open, and they fell. So took him in custody or whatnot. It ended up being a BB gun. Kid was I don't know, on drugs or something. So I'm at the at the computer and I'm running his name, and then my knee is just shaking uncontrollably. And I'm not telling you just a little bit. My body was just dumping that adrenaline. Oh boy, it was shaking. And I told some of the guys, senior guys, I'm like, look, I'm shaking. I'm not doing that. And they just kind of made fun of me for the next few weeks.
And they've all been through that.
Yeah.
I guarantee you that.
Yeah. I mean, it says a lot about what you say, where from what I hear, it's two things to really mitigate that wave that's coming after every cop.
Yep.
Which is talk about it, which I picture myself trying to talk about it, and it seems really difficult. And two, I do it a lot more now. I'm thinking about myself kind of, 10 years ago. And that self-acceptance thing is something I've been going through in my personal life as well. And you know, very experienced, very, very wise person you are, sir. And that, yeah, it just had me thinking, for sure.
Well, I was a cop for 27 years.
Mm-hmm.
I was shot at once, and I didn't even know it. And what had happened was I was handling a native call up on 8th Avenue, and me and my partner. And it was an overdose, a normal thing we dealt with every day. And all of a sudden we hear gunfire down below us in the subway area. So we respond down there. As soon as we got down on that area, other shots came out, and we both dove. Never once did I think they were shooting at me. All right, I was focused on the job. I was focused. We put the radio calls over this that, focused on the job. It was only after when we were processing the crime scene. I guess it was detectives or something said, wanted to know where we were, and there were a few people shot, but I said, well, I dove over here. He goes, well, you were shot at twice. I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, right behind you, we found two bullets, because there was a wall behind me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, wow, I didn't even know it. I was aware there was gunfire going on, but I wasn't, because I wasn't thinking that.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I gotta find the shooter. I gotta find the people that are hurt. That's what I was trained to do.
Right.
All right.
Right.
And so we go through this stuff. We go through things on a daily basis. I always said I can be sitting in my backyard having a beer with neighbors and all that, and eventually there's some talk about police work, but you
Right.
can't say anything
Yeah.
because they know because they watch television.
Yeah.
You don't. And if you ever tell them what you do on a daily basis, they think you're making it up
Yeah.
because they can't imagine that.
Yeah.
And I always thought that they couldn't even do what I did for one day
Yeah.
that I did for 27 years. They just wouldn't do it. But that's understandable because they don't understand my job. The only people that understand my job are other police officers. So I understand that.
Yeah. I've had to approach conversations or debates with family and friends who are not police officers differently now.
Yep.
Because you can't become passionately angry because of what you said. They will never understand it.
Yeah.
And I've beat myself on the head trying to write things to try to make them understand a lot. And I think that's Hamburger Hill, and we could circumvent that and
Yeah.
accept yourself and know your own personal journey, and that's good enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes, and it really, what I equate it to. I think a lot of people might have difficulty understanding this, but um, I equate it to, I'm a white guy. I equate it to minorities. I don't know. I can never understand how a minority feels because I'm a white male. I understand that. I could never understand how an African American feels, or an Hispanic feels, or an Asian it feels. Um, and I equate that to, yeah, nobody understands how a cop feels unless they're a cop. I wouldn't know how a minority feels because I'm not a minority.
Right.
If I was a minority, I would understand it.
Right.
But and I've learned through that process that that's why people don't understand what I do because they're not cops.
Yeah, I
And
think. I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
no, I don't know if that makes sense to
No, it
people,
does. It does.
but that's the way I processed it, And so yeah, I keep my mouth shut. My career was my career. I loved my career,
Yeah.
and to try to explain it to someone that's not a police officer.
Yeah, I think it's just the ability to not judge someone else's values based on yours. You know what I mean?
Yep.
If only they could do that. For if there was some reciprocity there, there'd be no wars in this world. So,
That was. Remember, my father always said. He was a World War II vet, and as his brothers were, his oldest brother was killed in Normandy, and he always said, I remember him saying, if world leaders were combat veterans, there'd never be another war. And that always, and that, I remember him saying that when I was a little kid, and that's always stuck with me, and I think it's so true. But I am disappointed when certain police leaders become politicians and they
Bobby,
change.
that's for a different podcast, Bobby. I could talk for a long time for that one.
When what we were talking about before, the stress,
Yeah.
the emotions of being a cop. Uh, we bury a lot of stuff. I wrote a piece recently about law enforcement mental health, and um, I've always referred to, well, first of all, the the, the what you face on the street, what you face in the department administration causes a lot of disenchantment, disgruntledness. Couple that with personal uh, mental anguish someone might be getting through. Um, sometimes the end game is suicide, and that's something we don't want to get to.
Yeah.
All right, um, I call it a contagion. And what I mean by that, I remember in the years after September 11th, I think my jobs suffered maybe about 10 suicides. That's unusual. That's, and not in over an extended period of time. And um, so it'd be easy to say, well, they were probably 9/11 related. Well, here's the problem. Maybe one of them was 9/11 related, but we all suffer mental anguish with family and with this and that.
Yeah.
We always feel overburdened. Depression sets in, this and that. And, you know, Officer A looks, who's suffering, looks at, see, Officer B killed himself. He ended his pain. That could be appealing to him. So could that thought be the contagion? Like he found a way out, maybe I can find a way out. And he kills himself. I remember uh, coming back the morning of September 12th, coming back to the station house. And first thing I did was I found a phone and called my wife. I hadn't spoken, spoke to my wife since I left for work early the previous morning. And I cried on the phone when I was talking to her. And so sometime later, a few days later, cop I was talking with, he said, "Bobby, do you remember what you did when you came back that the morning of the 12th?" I said, and I told him, I said, yeah, I called my wife and I cried. And he goes, "You cried like a baby." He goes, "And there's nothing wrong with that." And he showed a lot of empathy toward his brothers and sisters, for what we all went through. And some years later, he killed himself.
Wow.
And I always thought, wow, he helped me and others with his empathy. How did I miss his difficulties? You know, we have to be aware of each other. The key thing is being aware of changes in personality. If an officer is depressed, or you see some difference in him. My union, the Port Authority PBA, um, we were one of the first unions to start a mental health program back in 1991. We hired Dr. Peter Colleen, who's a former police officer. Now he's a psychoanalyst, uh, and he's our what we call stress counselor. Um, when it comes to the stress, depression, the mental problems that arise, the problem not coming forward is simply stigma. Uh, the, an average police officer, well, number one, the agency doesn't know how to deal with stigma, and the police officer doesn't uh, want to face the fear and embarrassment of that stigma. So the what my union did was we created a program where officers, if they're having mental problems. Everybody has mental problems, all right? It's no different than a physical problem. It's you have to embrace it. And what I mean by that, if you break your leg, you don't ignore it, do you? No, you embrace it. You want to get it better. Well, the same thing with your brain. It's no different. You have to embrace it to get it better. So we've had so many officers, uh, confer with Dr. Clean. He can't treat them, obviously. That's not part of the deal, but he helps them through. And it eliminates them going to the department where they're going to take the gun away. All right, they're going to take his badge away. Uh, and no officer wants to be known as a head case or be seen as a head case. All right, and that would take an officer with a fragile mental state, make it even worse, and certainly it could cause a big liability on the department. So we found tremendous success with that. Um, the and I can't help but think that I think the way to address these mental health issues in law enforcement, which are no different than any other segment in life, all
Mm-hmm.
right, but they seem to be uh, looked at differently in law enforcement. Um, there has to be a partnership between the agency, the union, hopefully if they're represented, and the individual. All right, and one has to take care of the other. All right, it's that simple. The officers have to be aware of difficulties their brothers and sisters might be going through. Um, People have to be aware that they can go to the union psychologist. Um, it's I think if we do that, then we don't get the agency involved
Mm-hmm.
because the agency has to take you know s- drastic measures. They have to.
Yeah. No, that all makes sense. I mean, so many things pop up in my head when you talk about that. Some of it, some kind of pessimistic opinions, but they all matter. I think one another layer to you seem to have put out a trifecta of this. I won't say cure, but a process to help this in the long term. I think that a mentorship program from probation into police, being a young cop on the streets by older cops is huge. Something I've been
Hmm.
thinking about for a long time, and I think that's another layer that would be amazing or something like that too.
Well, if we use the three-pronged approach, the
Mm,
agency's responsibility would be to develop education
yeah,
and training uh, in mental health issues right from the academy. As soon as you're accepted into the academy, you're expected to have it all together.
right,
All right,
right,
because you went through this incredible vetting process and all that,
right.
and but you don't. All right, um, so so I think it's incumbent upon the agency to have programs in place, not only in the academy, but as in service throughout an officer's career because it's not an issue that can be hidden anymore. It has to be up front. It's no different than your qualifications for firearms, for everything else you have to qualify on every year. It's you have to learn how to process what you're feeling, and you have to know where to go to get help. All right, and you have to eliminate the stigma of shame and fear from that. That's probably the most difficult part. But I think if if everybody got on the same page, the end game should all be the same: a healthy employee. That's what we want. All right. No one goes through their life without suffering depression, mental
Mm,
anguish, things like that. Have some sort of mental injury. Um, that's life. It's spotlighted though in law enforcement
yeah,
because, and I think a lot of that has to do with the authority and the gun, because to the public, and whether this is right or wrong, but that represents the authority and the position of the police officer.
Oh yeah,
And
there's a lot there.
it,
There's a lot
it,
of layers
yeah,
for
yeah.
sure.
So it's not an easy thing to figure out, but we, we have to get together on it. There's no question about it. Um, it
I think the vision is easy, but getting it done, it's another story to throw
well,
out.
that's always the problem.
Yeah,
It's you know,
and not
it,
to demean the vision you're giving. Like I think about this stuff too. It's just
yeah, no,
get
it's
excited about it. But
we I don't know if you're in the military or not, but you go through so much training, and the same thing with police work. You go through so much training, all right, and and we all get great training, and I don't care if you're in a big city department or a small department out west or in the Midlands. The training, we all get trained the same way, and we all have the same job.
mhm.
Um, but the actor you go against, just like the enemy in war, yeah, they have an equal say,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and that's I remember when my younger son, before he was when he was getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan, I said, Are your Marines ready?" He goes, "I trained them as well as I can, but you never know until the bullets start flying."
It's true.
You know,
That's 100% true. There's
and
some to say. I'm sorry.
no, no, that I mean that's
Yeah, that mental training. So I've reached kind of an epiphany in police work where the copper that gets into three, four good shootings in his career, we hail that officer for good reason. Part of it is our humility and shit. Can I do that? And because you train so hard to do something and it never happens. And I think, and I'm writing about this now. I want to kind of almost establish this culture of like, the copper who doesn't ever get in a shooting should be celebrated, maybe even more, right? They're We're expert de-escalation experts, right? So um, I don't know. There's something to say about that, both sides that should be celebrated.
well, um,
The readiness, right?
yeah. I mean, let's face it, majority of cops never get in a shooting.
Right.
You know, I worked in one command in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan. Every day you had your gun out. All right, it was a real street crime command,
Mm-hmm.
and um, but thankfully you never had to use it. You used it to protect yourself.
Yeah.
All right, you dealt with shootings back then. You were more worried about, because everybody was carrying a blade or something, and you're
Mm-hmm.
more worried about getting sliced up.
Mm-hmm.
But the the most cops never get into a shooting. I remember once reading that once a cop is involved in a shooting, he's more likely to be involved in a second shooting
Yeah.
and more.
Yeah.
And I don't know the reason for that other than been there, done that, and it becomes more easier the second time, I guess. I don't know. I have no idea. But the the no cop ever wants to kill anybody.
Yeah.
All right, uh, because we're human. Right? We don't want to do that. And of course, you think about what comes after that, because you're never going to be right. You know, and so, um, but we do. Police officers who have been in firefights, you're right. We do celebrate them, and we celebrate them whether they survive or not. Think about that.
Yeah.
You know.
My critical incident was a shooting,
Okay.
and it was weird. Not weird, but I was being observant of how different coppers approached me about it. Some were very nonchalant, like, and some were uh, very. I don't know how to say this without. Some were just very kind of straight up about it. Like, hey, better him than you. Glad you're alive. good job, kiddo, or whatever it may be. And someone pull me to the side, those who have been in one, and they'll say, hey, man, you all right? Things like that. And I still don't know how to respond at that time. And a lot of people would, I'm guilty of this too. Like they'll look for a short period of time. They'll look at you different in their little police culture, right? And I think of it like, let's say I responded a certain way, which is good for the last one. I can't be sure that I won't panic on the next one if there's a next one. So I need to keep my ass humble, right? And I think there's a certain fear of nervousness when a copper sees another copper who goes through one and they're like, man, I hope I can do that. That type of heroism outlook is different from celebrating a kill. I think there's this nervousness about it, all this preparation. We hope we don't, but we do. Will we be ready? Holy crap, that copper got in two. Okay, what does he have? I got to make sure I react with that if my time comes. So does that make sense? It kind of took me a while to figure
Well,
out why people are reacting to me differently.
well, first of all, my experience has been, and I haven't been in a shooting. All right. Meaning I haven't shot anybody. I've been shot at. But uh, I think your entire career of an officer always has on his mind, whatever the situation, could I do that? Could I do that?
Yeah.
No matter how much experience that officer has. What I want to ask you, Chris, is when people approached you, did anyone come up to you and say, Chris, I'm sorry what you went through?
No.
That would have helped.
Yeah.
That would have helped.
I'm glad if it had to happen. I'm glad it happened later in my career. I was, I think, at a better place to process it. And thinking back, and it's all kind of delayed realizations of what I was going through. Because every day I felt fine. I would bet $1,000 on the day after. I'm fine. And I looked at myself that day, a week later. I'm like, well, I was spinning. So, given that, I, I I can't imagine this happening when I had 2-3 years on the job. It would just be tougher.
Yeah.
And the lack of people's your partner's ability, or they don't know how to help you. It's not their fault. There's a culture, hush hush, hush hush. He's got to go through his process. Don't ask about it. Don't ask about it. Don't ask about it. People don't know how to help, how to be there because of the culture we're in, and that makes it so much worse. There's a lot there. It's a lot there. I'm glad it happened later in life, and I'm trying to later in my career. And I think when other people get in any critical incident, I always approach differently. But I never thought about that question or about that statement. I'm sorry that happened.
But because that's the block we put up as cops. Yeah. We have to be tough. We have to be empathetic. We have to be we have to understand the trauma that Chris went through.
Yeah.
In those few seconds.
Right.
All right. It's going to be with him the rest of his life. All right. And he's always going to question it.
Yeah.
So we have to show him that we don't have to have it's not that we had to go through what you went through to understand it, but we do understand you're a police officer.
Right.
And we understand that every day we take actions against people that, we don't want to take, but we have to do it. Yeah. All right. It's two of my classmates were shot up, and it wasn't the type of thing. They weren't responding to a job. They were both involved in arrests, and back then we had to take it was a narcotics arrest, take the drugs right to the lab. So they were, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that. They're coming back to central booking, and back then it was a 36, 48-hour process to put arrests through, and they just stopped at a diner on Queens Boulevard. They walked into a robbery.
Yeah.
And as they opened the door, the perps inside opened fire on them.
Wow.
And they got some good shots back. Actually, there were 3 of them. I'm sorry. And to show you how cops think, my 2 classmates only had a year on the job. The 3rd cop they were with was a very senior cop. He didn't go with them right away because he noticed something about a vehicle that was parked out front. And it didn't make sense to him for some reason. I don't know the reason why, but didn't. And he went over to check that vehicle. And then that's when all the shit happened. All right. And one of the perps, both of these cops were shot. They both got off shots though. And another perp came down and then face to face with the cop who went to that car. Face to face gun battle.
Mm.
All right. And the Will is his name, and he wound up becoming a detective. But all his shots, face to face, within 3 feet, all his shots were in the lower pelvic area on this guy.
Yeah.
You know, but because you don't, even though we go through training and all that, and center mass and all that, his shots were all low, but it was enough to stop the guy. Yeah. And I remember responding to a job about quite a considerable time later. It was like a gun run, as we call it.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't my post. It was one of the guys that was shot. It was his first day back on duty. All right. And the sergeant came on the scene, and sergeant said, "Bobby, you got this." Yeah, I understood. I said, "Yeah, it's not my post, but naturally I got it." And the cop, Billy, said, "No, no, Sergeant, I take it." And Sergeant looks at him and goes, "Billy, it's too soon." He goes, "If I don't do it now, it's always going to be too soon." I can always imagine what that cop, when he had to call his wife that night and tell her, I won't be home tonight, I have an arrest. Last phone call she got like that, he was shot twice. That took guts.
Yeah.
That took guts. But his response was the perfect response. If I don't do it now, it will always be too soon. So I give him a lot of credit. And and one of those, which is normal, he lives the rest of his life with one of the bullets still in him because it was too close to his spine. They couldn't move it, And so it's
there's so many, I want to say great, there's so many in our world, great stories out there of survival, of mental survival that we need to hear. And I want to thank you for sharing what you shared about being at Ground Zero 9/11. You had me in goosebumps, and I
didn't mean to do that.
I wanted to keep asking more questions and going all these places, and I just wanted to let you speak because it's not every day that we get to hear from somebody who was there. And sharing on this platform is for other officers, right? Mostly. So I think it's really important to hear your story. I think we could talk forever about, again, politics, leadership, suicide, everything. We could go on forever, and we should definitely, if you allow, maybe I'll go to New York and we could record another one.
Oh, sure, no problem at all. But let me just back up to something you just said. I'm going to say this is a pet peeve of mine. So I don't want you to be.
What I say?
You use the word Ground Zero.
When I said it, I felt something.
I probably looked at you, and certainly in my job with the union now as the public information officer, I deal with this all the time. The term Ground Zero is a media creation.
Okay.
All right. Ask any Port Authority cop what that is. No, it's the World Trade Center. The term Freedom Tower. No, it's One World Trade Center. We lost a lot of people there. We lost 2 police stations there. It's to every Port Authority cop. We were there. We had a precinct there when they removed the first shovel of earth from the ground to build that complex. We had a precinct there. It's the World Trade Center. Ground Zero is a media creation, and I hope I can use this platform when the audience is other Leos, that they get that. It's not Ground Zero. It's the World Trade Center.
Thank you for setting me straight. I apologize for my ignorance on that, and I'm glad I learned that lesson from you.
Well, I don't I just wanted it to be out there.
100%.
All right. And hey, I've been guilty of it. All right. But and I deal with reporters every day, and I say, no, it's the World Trade Center.
Yes,
It's
sir.
just like, here's another thing too. The Port Authority Police Department is the largest transportation-related police department in the country. We do things that no other police department does. Varies the various the types of patrols we do. When I talk to reporters, and mostly it's New York, reporters, they always say, the PD. I go, you mean the PAPD? They go, well, no. I said, people in the media think there's only two police departments in this country, the NYPD and the LAPD. And yes, they take all the air out of the room, right? But Chicago is not even on their radar, all right? I say, but there's 18,000 police departments in this country. We're all trained the same way, and we all do the exact same job. A cop, everybody talks about big city cops, the most dangerous. I don't know about that. The cop out in what I call Podunk, Iowa, who has 100 square miles to patrol by himself, he's the one in danger. And if you look at statistics, it's those smaller regional that's where they get the most line of duty deaths. When I worked in Manhattan in Hell's Kitchen, when I got in trouble, I had 25 cops up my ass in a second. All right? The cavalry was always there. The guy out in that patrolling 100 square miles, he has no one. All right?
Couldn't agree with you more.
So there's a lot to be said about working for a larger department.
Yeah.
But the dangers are all the same.
Right.
The dangers are all the same. And there are dangers. There's no question about it. There are dangers to police work. And the overwhelming majority of us get through it unscathed. Thank God.
It's true.
Yeah.
Would you like to dedicate this podcast to any particular fallen officer or group of fallen officers?
Well, obviously the brothers and sister I lost on September 11th, 2001. And I say sister because we had one female officer killed. Could I take time to tell her story?
100%.
Captain Kathy Mazza. At that time, she was the commanding officer of the Port Authority Police Academy. Port Authority Police headquarters is in Jersey City, right across the Hudson River. The police academy is also in Jersey City. She responded that day with a squad of instructors, all police officers. Kathy was also a cardiac nurse, registered nurse. She was a tough, tough woman and a sweetheart at the same time. I remember when she came on the job. She had a hard side to her, but she could be gentle. She was married. Her husband was a New York City cop. So she left her career as a cardiac nurse to become a police officer. And she rose to the ranks pretty well. Before she was the academy commanding officer. She was the XO at my command. An XO is the second in charge, the executive officer. The commanding officer has the throne. The XO does all the work. All right? And I remember walking. I was always a union delegate and representative, and so naturally I had to discuss issues with her almost on a daily basis. I remember walking in her office one day. On the wall in her office was a framed picture of a close-up of a patient in an operating room, and the picture was like from the chest, the rib bones up, and the center was all open heart, you see the heart, and then draped, obviously in surgical draping. Right? I looked at her. I said, "Cap, what's that?" She goes, "That's me."
Hmm.
I go, "You?" She goes, "Yeah, that's when I had open heart surgery." I said, "Oh wow." I thought it's kind of weird that you had that on the
Right,
wall.
right.
And she goes, "I have it up there so you guys know I have a fucking heart." That was Kathy. So so she responded on September 11th. This is a difficult story to tell. And she was with a squad of cops. First tower came down. When that came down, uh, they were evacuating people from the other tower. Got to the point where they had a lady in a rescue chair who couldn't walk. They were getting her down all these flights of steps. They got down to the lobby. Kathy knew what was going to happen. She was aware the other tower came down some time ago. She ordered the cops with her to get out, to save themselves. They didn't want to, but she ordered them. They went. I know, and I spoke to some of them afterwards that this has always bothered them. There were witnesses that said they saw her pull her weapon and start shooting out the big lobby windows to make extra escape routes for people. She stayed with that woman in the chair. She wouldn't leave her. She knew what was going to happen. And they found her body next to the woman's body that was in the chair. That woman, her life, but certainly her death, was one of just amazing, incredible heroics. She put everybody before herself. And remember, she was a medical professional and she was a police officer. So she was guided by the oaths that she took. And she didn't violate those oaths. That's a story everybody should know, and certainly all our female police officers. But Kathy should always be honored and never ever forgotten, just like all the PAPD 37, all the first responders, and the incredible loss of humanity that day.
Thank you.
Chris, thank you so much.